Welcome to Talking with Tech. My name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with Rachel Madel. Rachel, how's it going?
It's going good, Chris. How you doing?
All right. Well, okay. So the last times we got together, we talked a little bit about some stories that happened over the summer, personal stuff that's been happening. What about professionally? What's been going on, let's say, since the late spring of 2025 to when this airs?
Yeah, great question. Lots has been going on. I was so sad to say goodbye to a clinician that has been in my practice for a couple of years. She went on maternity leave, and I was really excited for her and her new chapter, but was really sad that we had to say goodbye. And that put me into hiring mode, which I have been in before. I've been in private practice for almost 12 years now, and I have definitely hired in the past. It just felt a little different this time. It felt like a little trickier. I don't know if the market's changing in Los Angeles. I will say I wish it was a remote position, because I reached out to my whole community online, and so many people were, is this virtual? Can I do this remotely? And it was like, I wish. This is actually a local position in Los Angeles. So long story short, I had to end up shifting and changing some things in our practice for my online business. But we're in a good space. I am in the process of finalizing the re-recording of AAC Ally assessment. I just launched AAC Ally treatment last year, and I feel so proud about that course. I have really done, I think, the best you can do as far as asynchronous learning when it comes to really helping integrate the information that clinicians are learning. There's a ton of videos and reflective questions. I'm encouraging everybody to pause the video, think about what's going on in the video. I'm asking them reflective questions. Then I'm also thinking through the lens of how to help them learn how to coach. So then I'm encouraging them to think of reflective questions, like what would you ask this mom if you're doing a coaching session with her? So anyway, it's been really cool to see how valuable that's been to people. I get a lot of feedback from the course once people are done, and it's been, I'd say, the biggest kind of takeaway, which I'm so happy about, was I love the coaching module. I loved the videos of kids you're working with, and parents sharing videos, and the whole kind of process that I do clinically with coaching. And so that's been really cool. And so I'm doing something similar with kind of a relaunch of the assessment version. It was 5 years ago that I created AAC Ally Assessment, which was the original course. And there's just so much that has changed in my clinical work, and also just in the field in general. And so I am completely revamping the course, doing a lot more with coaching and a lot more kind of case studies and videos of assessments, to get people thinking kind of critically about how do we assess for AAC, and what types of considerations are we thinking through? How do we get teams on board? And how do we really use the assessment process as a way to just launch into the coaching process, right? It's so important to really support communication partners throughout the process of AAC assessment, and just kind of rethinking the way that we approach it. And so I'm really excited. I have had a lot going on personally, which we shared in past episodes, but I'm very close to finishing this new course, and I'm hoping to launch it this fall. And so I'm really excited to be done and get it out there and get people, taking it and getting feedback. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what we've been doing over here.
If people wanted to learn more or get notified that the course is now available, or look into past work, what's the best way for them to stay involved?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's on my email list will be notified. So you can go to my website. Our freebie vault is kind of the door into our email list. You can also just go to aacally.com, and there's a form you fill out that, again, puts you on our email list, and that's essentially the wait list. So you'll be the first to know when we open it. So yeah, that's the best way. I mean, I definitely will be posting on social media when it opens, but social media, sometimes you don't, for whatever reason, the algorithm doesn't hit you right and you don't see things. So I would say the email list is the best way to be in the know. So Chris, tell me what's going on with you.
Well, let's see. We still have the course, the specific language system first approach. People write me about that all the time. And that continues to garner support and attendance in that course for people learning, okay, well, yes, there's lots of information out there on the internet. Sometimes it's wrong information, right? So just go right to the source. So that exists. Go to chrisbouguet.com if you want to learn more about that course. But I think more than what's been going on with me, it's my wife that I want to brag about. Dr. Bouguet got her doctorate over a year ago now. And one of the things she studied as part of her doctorate is, and what she did her thesis on with a team of individuals was other people getting their doctorate, is chronic absenteeism. So in many states now, I'm curious how it is around the country, in other states and then around the world, but certainly many states now have adopted a new way of evaluating schools. And part of that evaluation of schools is attendance. So what are your attendance numbers? And there's a threshold for what is considered chronically absent. And so her and her PhD buddy created a course called The Secret Sauce, which is, again, helping educators or educational teams go through a process of thinking about what's up with our attendance and what can be done about it based on what other places have done, on research that's been done. And so we're not floundering trying to think, well, what if we did this magic thing or this magic thing for attendance? It's here. Develop this plan based off of research and work that has already been done. Like I said, a lot of places now, this is 10% or something. The formula might vary depending on where you are, but it's a part of the algorithm for what makes a school successful and what it's being evaluated on by the state educational departments. So it's becoming more important. It's always been important. So I just feel like her timing is right. It's so brand new, Rachel, that there's not even a Bitly yet, or a website. Like they just finished it, launched it, but there's still some, the stuff you put around your course. You know this better than anybody. People are not going to find it by accident. You got to advertise it, right? So what does that look like? And then, so there's still some work to be done there, but the largest part is creating the content and making sure it's awesome. And that part is done. So really pleased to announce, like I said, it's called The Secret Sauce. You can check out Mel Bouguet anywhere. That's her handle everywhere, or just write me and I'll send it to you. All those are great options for now until they have a better system for getting the word out.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, I'll have to send her a text message and tell her I'm so excited for her. And let me know if there's any way I can support that, because while I don't do a lot in the schools, I feel like I still access a lot of people that are in the schools and administrators and things like that. So it sounds like a really valuable learning opportunity for especially administrators who are trying to really dial in their district and improve attendance. I feel like that is such an important thing. Like, how are kids supposed to learn and if they're not in school? And, I know that there's a lot of, especially with our population, a lot of reasons why that might be the case. However, sounds like there's a really clear plan forward. And I think that that's oftentimes the hardest part is developing the plan. And so it sounds like she's taken the hard part out of it. And so I'm sure it's going to be wildly successful, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, and they're like us, Rachel. I think we try and keep it light and have some fun. And there's personalities back and forth. It's not just her; it's her and her partner. So there's conversation, sort of similar to how you and I are with Talking with Tech, which brings us to Talking with Tech. So no surprise here if you've been a long time Talking with Tech listener, or even if you just started listening to it. We had a little bit of a hiatus where we've explained over the last couple episodes some of the reasons behind that hiatus. But now we're looking forward. And so the question becomes, Rachel, what do we want Talking with Tech to be and to become? In some ways, it feels like we sort of did it. We've been for over 7 years, 350 plus episodes, bonus content, Patreon. We could keep going just as we are. And I think it would still be really helpful. But then we started thinking, well, is this a time where this sort of natural break happened for us, that it should we should be thinking about what comes next. How does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had a lot of conversations and we're still kind of navigating those waters, but we've discussed, like, what if we change the format a little bit? Like, how do we help really support listeners across the board? We know that there's some first-time listeners that are introduced to our podcast, whether that's you and I talking at a speaking event or someone stumbling upon an episode from a Google search. And so the question becomes, like, at this point, since we've been doing the podcast for so long and there's so much content, like, where do you even begin? Like, how do you start? Like, and it's, one step at a time, of course, but how do we maybe curate or guide that experience for people that are new to AAC? We also have a lot of amazing listeners who have been ride or dies with us for, almost the entire length of the podcast. And so it's like, if you've listened to so many episodes, like, how do we maybe, change the format so that we can optimize the way that people are introduced to the podcast, the way that people can share the podcast. And so we've thought about a lot of these questions as we've tried to navigate, like, what are we doing next? How do we shift? I feel like the best businesses and entrepreneurs are the ones that are constantly thinking about innovating and trying to optimize the way that things are unfolding. And I think our podcast is no different. Like, how do we continue to provide value? And I think that's partially where our listeners come in. So, if you have any ideas, thoughts, things that you love about the podcast, things that you'd like to see more of course, we're always open. You can email us at talkingwithtech@gmail.com. That's our email. And yeah, I think that seems like we're trying to really, like, dial in some things and make some decisions, but it's been a fun process to kind of reflect back and think about where we've been and then look forward and figure out, okay, where are we going and how do we create whatever it is that feels aligned for us. And I think that's the cool thing, is that we can choose that. We can decide that, like, we started this thing and, like, we can shift and change. And of course, we would love insight. So if you have any, please share. But it's been a fun process to kind of figure out what comes next.
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's super fun to be brainstorming the future of Talking with Tech together. I want to be clear, too, to say that we know that there's still a huge need, right? So yes, we've been, I think, some good contributing. We've done some good work contributing to the field here in Talking with Tech. That work needs to continue. It's just, what format does that look like? And I would also reiterate that, yes, if you have ideas, listeners, we'd love to hear from you. So reach out in any vein possible. You could reach out to Rachel separately, me separately, talkingwithtech@gmail.com, however you could reach us. We would love to get your ideas because a reformatting is coming. It's just, and we have some good ideas. We just want to make sure they are the best ideas and that they align with what other people are looking for too.
Yes, totally. So we would love to hear from you. Chris, let's dive into the interview I did today. It was such a good one. I interviewed Quinn Kelly. Quinn specializes in AAC and American Sign Language. And I felt like it was such a great opportunity. I can't remember exactly who recommended Quinn. One of our listeners reached out and asked if we had any episodes on sign language. And I said no. And Quinn's name was brought up. And I just am so excited that I had the chance to interview her. We talk all about the intersection of AAC with deaf and hard of hearing populations. And wow, like, there's so much to, like, think about. And even as I was interviewing her, just so much more came to the surface. And so it was a really amazing interview. And again, it's not all the time that we run into this intersection with deaf and hard of hearing and AAC. But when we do, it's like, how do we feel equipped? And there's lots of things to think about. There's lots of considerations that I go through, and Quinn helps kind of discuss. And I thought it was an amazing episode. Without further ado, here's my interview I did with Quinn Kelly.
If you enjoy Talking with Tech, we could use your help in spreading the word about the podcast. Please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes. The more positive reviews the podcast gets, the easier it becomes for others to find it. The more people who find the podcast, the more the word spreads about how to effectively consider and implement AAC. And who doesn't want that? If that sounds good to you, please take a moment and give the podcast a quick review. We'd so very much appreciate it. Now, let's get back into the episode.
Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined today by Quinn Kelly. Quinn, I'm so excited to have you here.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here too.
Yes. So let's just start off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Of course. I am a speech language pathologist based in New Jersey and New York. I'm a bilingual speech language pathologist, but with American Sign Language. I have my ASLPI certification through Gallaudet University, and I primarily work with kids using AAC and ASL. I also sit on the AAC committee for the New Jersey Speech and Hearing Association, and I work in a private practice, the way you say, that is focused in Northern New Jersey, as well as I'm a content expert for Language First, which is an amazing organization that supports professionals working with deaf and hard of hearing kids. So it's a really cool bundle of lots of stuff.
Yeah. And I'm really excited that we're covering just kind of the intersection between deaf and hard of hearing and AAC. And I know that there's just not a lot of content on the topic. And so, we've had questions throughout the years about how do we support sign language and this population and integrate AAC. And there's definitely some mixed opinions about it. And so I'm really excited to kind of dive in with you, just because it is an area, if we're really thinking through the lens of supporting individuals with multimodal communication, and really increasing access for all students who need support using AAC. This is obviously a population that we need to consider. And there's, definitely things about this population that make it tricky, both just to execute and implement AAC, but also in my own clinical experience to collaborate with other professionals. So I'm really excited to dive in. I guess let's just start by the overview. What are the things that we need to think about when we're thinking about deaf and hard of hearing populations and AAC?
Definitely. I think some of the biggest questions that I've received over a period of time that I've been working with this population is just is AAC even an option? I think sometimes even myself, I'm a really big tech nerd. I love working with technology, and other professionals who are AAC geared, who do AAC evaluations, whether they're contractor with the district or things like that. They're so I have a kid. Is this ethical? Is this not? And I think so often AAC professionals were everyone is a candidate for AAC. Everyone can use it. And I definitely think that is true. But I think when we are looking at this population, that sometimes it's not always true. And I think those lines very often get blurred. And where I try and come in is try to kind of help professionals understand what can we do before we just provide a device, or if a device is warranted, what can we do to make adjustments and making sure that we're being culturally sensitive, we're being identification sensitive, language sensitive, visually sensitive, and making sure that all the professionals involved are present. Especially as in this field, we always have to be so into interprofessional collaboration, interdisciplinary collaboration, and making sure that we're, always asking for help and what can we do? How can we be better? And kind of thinking outside the box for our kiddos. So I think this is a really great example of where we need to do that, and to kind of just be open to that, and open to collaborating, and open to the fact that we may not know everything about this population in terms of AAC.
Yeah. And I think that where I've come into, some, we'll call it challenge, I guess, or trickiness, is that, this population, depending on just family preferences, it really can dictate one way or another, which path you go down. So can you kind of speak to the different paths with this population? Obviously there's an AAC path, but there also could be a path that doesn't include AAC, or it's a modified version of AAC. And so I'd love to kind of just dive in to the deep end with those.
Yeah, definitely. I think before even getting to that point, I think it's looking at like who could possibly be a candidate for AAC who is deaf or hard of hearing. And so I've worked with the organization Language First, myself and two other professionals who have extensive knowledge with AAC and who have worked with various populations. And we've kind of come up with our own criteria or like who we think, or just different things as to what we look for as to why they would need it. So some of those things are when we're looking at our communicators is like cognition. Do we see cognitive delays? Do we see possibly another diagnosis? So are we looking at deaf plus or deaf with disabilities? Are we looking at autism? Are we looking at cerebral palsy, Usher syndrome, which is two different types of Usher syndrome that can be linked with visual components, physical accessibility, charge syndrome, Noonan syndrome. So again, when we're looking at different types of diagnoses that are as a comorbidity, it's, things can get a little bit tricky. Looking at fine motor. So again, like access to the device. So when we do have our visual communicators who are using ASL to communicate, and now what is their access method? Is there access with their hands that are going to be a little bit difficult? Also looking at gross motor as well. So like if all these things are impacting their ability to communicate with sign language, I then let's look at AAC and more of a, multimodal, I guess like other things besides like, just signing, looking at like multimodal, that kind of a thing. And then just in general, I like to make sure that my kids have an L1.
Define what L1 means.
So an L1 is your first language. So if you are so for me as someone who's bilingual, my L1, my first language is spoken English. My second language, which is my L2, is sign language, American Sign Language, because I can say sign language and I can mean Auslan from, Australia, or I could mean, another, there is not one type of sign language. There's hundreds of different types of sign languages. So my L1 personally is spoken English and my L2 is American Sign Language. So that is different types of Ls when we're talking about the language. So the different paths that could be that a communicator might use, I think there's just so many different ones. And something that I kind of feed off onto is that communication might look a little bit different, and that's okay. So I think as professionals, we're so used to kind of like trying to color in the lines or like, focusing on what we know. And I think this kind of puts everything on its axis. So the different paths that we can kind of look at very often we're going to be using ASL and AAC. So like that's kind of we'll start with that one. So different communicators could be like maybe they're signing their response and then maybe as the SLP or the communication partner, you use the device back and you kind of are going back and forth. And there's no expectation, like if I'm always providing and modeling with my AAC device and then reinforcing with sign or, reinforcing if you're in a school, maybe you have an interpreter with you or wherever the situation may be, that both the modality and the support are going to kind of be working in tandem to always feed off of each other. So sometimes I get the question of, but then what do I do about their goals? How do I follow it? And so I always like to say use and or. So and or AAC or ASL and or AAC, ASL, and spoken language. So, or like I put in parentheses like total communication, or that I could put like communication modality of preference. And then in the short-term goals, I will then have a short-term goal for each possible outcome of communication, just so that I can kind of better track it a little bit and see like what is the preferred communication modality of, my patient, my client, my student. So that's kind of like what I look at the different ways. So you can kind of do just focusing on two and then going back and forth and just being open to the fact that like I will emphasize. So like if they sign something, I then model it back. But I think very often professionals kind of get into this hold of like, well, they use it on the device. Now I'm going to make them sign it. Or then they signed it. Now I'm going to make them use it on the device. You don't ask me to repeat myself when I say, so like, I think it's just respecting that you're the one who's going to be then like emphasizing or copying or, and kind of doing that. There are so many different, I think, ways and percentages of use. It doesn't always have to be like all or nothing. So I think kind of being open to that. And just in terms of AAC, I think a very common question I get in terms of like, a problem with a path that sometimes happens in public schools is that, you have a kid who is deaf or hard of hearing, who there might not be a teacher of the deaf TOD services, and they're struggling academically. And so they're like, we want to give them an AAC device. And sometimes that's where I've come in, where it's like, well, have we attempted to provide them with the professionals they need? Do they have an interpreter? Do they have ASL services? If they don't have ASL services, but they're a kid who is deaf or hard of hearing, who might be using cochlear implants and hearing aids, or hearing aids, what have we done to support them otherwise to help with their communication? Because sometimes when we're just going right to a device, it's like people don't realize that it's a lifestyle choice. Like I say it, like that's how I kind of say it. Like it's not a quick fix, as we all know. So it's like, why are we then going to not try and find a solution by maybe making like environmental changes, academic changes to support communication versus them being like, let's give them a device. So I think sometimes that is a path that, AAC evaluators will ask me, like, this is what I'm running into. Like I don't really know what to do ethically. So I think sometimes that ends up being a path that people will go down and is not always going to give them the results that they think. So I think, again, kind of like circling back to like, we want to make sure that like we have done everything, that there is is there something else going wrong? Is there a communication disorder within like their spoken language, within their sign language? Is there something, is there another diagnosis? So that's happening. That is impeding their inability to have like full access to like their cochlear implants or hearing aids. So I think that can sometimes be like, let's make sure we cover all of our bases before we decide to give a device. And very often with these different paths, we are looking at a more visual perspective. So one of my favorite things I love talking about when I do speak with other professionals is like, how can we now take something that is more auditory focused and use now for now visually reinforce it versus auditorily reinforce it. So things that I like to do or like I work on with my students is I like to like, now we're going to like, you created a message, we're raising our hand. There's like a button that like, I'll buy on Amazon that they'll click on the back of it. It means it's beeping. They'll show around visually that they have a message instead of like, it gives them the feedback. It gives someone else the feedback because our deaf and hard of hearing users who may not hear if they click the sentence, is the volume up? Is the volume down? That's also like another component. If we have a cognitive delay, like, do they remember all these multi-step things? Like, did my checking here? Is it popping up? Is it blinking? Is it doing all these things? So I've used like a red button that I bought from Amazon that will blink and that alerts other people. Having something on their desk that will swivel so they turn it around and they show, and it will turn like 360. So I really like doing that. And then connecting it to Bluetooth to their hearing aids or cochlear implants. When you do run into that though, and if they are, if the student does benefit from the auditory feedback, that we can go into the settings and change the rate, change the pitch and the tone to make sure that auditorily it's benefiting them, but as well as that, like, again, we're still using those strategies because like they're hearing the feedback if the child, is signing, speaking and using the device, but that their communication partners don't. So sometimes they're like, oh, I hear it, but then they don't realize that other people are not catching the message. So I think it's trying to find different strategies and different tools or where they're positioned in the classroom and things like that. That are really, really important when we are thinking about AAC and the different paths of these students, that there's different supports that can back each of these paths up.
Yeah. I mean, something that you shared, which I feel like really resonates, is kind of, if we're thinking about the kind of criterion that we would be looking at when we're deciding, should we try AAC or not? I think one of the big things that maybe not every professional kind of considers is that there's a huge cultural and community aspect of American Sign Language. And for a child that is deaf or hard of hearing, being able to integrate into that community is really an important thing. And if we can really promote that, kind of to your point of like, well, in a school, like we don't have access to, the right type of supports. And so like, we'll just do this. And it's like, well, that comes at like such a significant cost if you're thinking about an individual's life and their ability to integrate with a community and to be able to connect fully with that community. And so I do think that these decisions come very weighted, or should. And so really connecting with the team and sometimes even educating the parents, because the parents don't really understand the levity of a decision like this. It's kind of like, well, just whatever you guys think, right? And it's like, well, we really need to be informed as educators to help our families understand, if we go down this path, this is what it looks like. When we go down this path, this is what it looks like. Here's what it looks like if we're trying a few different things. And like, how are we measuring success? And like, what types of things are we thinking about to determine whether or not this might be a successful path? And so I think just to kind of underscore what you already said, I think that's a really important piece to all this, is making sure our families understand the different layers of support and really advocating on their behalf, so that they feel like they were a part of the decision-making process and they feel really good about the decision that, the team came to.
Definitely. I mean, something that I feel like many people aren't really aware of is that 9 out of 10 families that have a child that is born deaf and hard of hearing, it's the first deaf or hard of hearing person they've met. It's very often when they're born to hearing families, mm-hmm. It's they don't know. And it's not for, it's just something that's new. It's something that it's, like I try and equate it to some of my families. Like, imagine if your child was born and they only were able to speak Russian. Well, what do you do? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what options are we doing? Like trying to, again, like putting in a different mindset. And some of my fans will laugh at me and they're like, oh yeah, I see what you're getting there. So it's like making sure that we are aware and also just trying to be patient with families in their gaining access to knowledge of like, do they want their child to be a part of the deaf and hard of hearing community while they're, aided or not aided? Do they want them to sign? Do they want them to not sign? Do they want them to be a multimodal communicator? Like, what does that look like in terms of their family unit as their child's identity, as the parent's individual identity with this child? Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's like a big like root system that we have to really be supportive of as professionals. And sometimes, like, I know so many of my families, they're like, whatever you think is best. And sometimes if a professional doesn't know, then we're guiding them, like we're thinking what's best for us, what's easier for us. And it's like, we have to think in their shoes. And sometimes that is a little bit harder. It might take more time. And very often when I, am working in private practice, or I just have met families in different, instances where I'm like, they're the only child in their district with, with a hearing loss. And it's like, what does that look like? And I have a kiddo right now where the mom is, kind of teetering, like, what do I do? If I put her in a mainstream school, like, will she have that advocacy? Will she have anyone that understands, like, when her hearing aids die, like if they get wet, if like the battery, like what, helping her child navigate through her own education, and then while advocating for herself at such a young age. So I think it's very complex, and we have to be very open to the fact that there are multiple paths that exist and not just the ones that are easier for us. And also just kind of including also like that families speak other languages at home. One of the first families that I've ever worked with, they spoke Spanish at home, primarily Spanish speaking family. And so while we were doing different trials and feature matching, like that was a really big concern of the family. Like they wanted the app to be able to have a trilingual feature of the ability to have, Spanish be included, because the father did not speak English. So it's like, okay, like, what are we going to do? How will this, be set? Like making sure that it's going to be Bluetooth connected, but then he knows how to navigate it, and like figuring out different things. And also like the literacy aspect of like just so much decisions for this family, and making sure that I knew as much as I could and being able to provide lots of different options for them, and getting out of my comfort zone, to be honest. I mean, it was something I was kind of like, wow, this is interesting. And like, what can I do and how can I teach myself and ask others? And kind of going back to like, as SLPs, we do interact with so many different professionals, and being open to that, and that we may not know the answer, and that taking on this new information and trying to learn it ourselves while like integrating it within what we do know.
Mm-hmm,
so,
mm-hmm.
Big fun picture.
Yeah. I also want to kind of share a little bit. You talked about this population also having concomitant things going on, whether that's autism or some type of rare incidence diagnosis. And so I'm guessing that puts a different spin or a different lens in which you kind of look at a student. And I'm just curious from your lens, what are the things that we really want to be looking out for in order to determine how to best support a student, especially if they do have kind of other diagnoses at play?
That's a great question. So for kiddos who are deaf and hard of hearing that are candidates for AAC, I will never forget this. I worked with a boy who was 23. I worked with him for a year. He was at a school for the deaf, and it wasn't, I think, a match for what the family was looking for. And then they moved into an autism program school. And the mom said to me, one of our last sessions working together was that people don't understand how she views her son and how her family views her son is they see the autism diagnosis first and deafness second. And I think that blew the lid off of, for me professionally, because I was like, I was doing that professionally, where I was more looking at the different strategies in one diagnosis direction versus another, and kind of bringing deafness in underneath and looking at ASL and visual and that type of thing. But I was, for lack of a better words, treating him with autism in mind, and just having the mom kind of say that, where I look at his primary diagnosis is he is on the spectrum. And that's where she's like, I feel that schools don't see that because they're like, oh, he's deaf. And that's kind of it. And she's like, no, he is an autistic boy who has an interpreter, and who she's like, that's how I view my son. I don't see him as a kid who really needs to be in a school for the deaf, because his primary mode of communication is through AAC. Not through spoken language, not through sign language. She's like, maybe receptively understanding sign language, but expressively it's AAC across the board. Mm-hmm. And so she's like, I don't think people get that. And they just have their opinion. And I was just like, I was enamored. I thought that was such something I will forever carry with me. And I really thank the mom for having that just for her identifying that and be able to use that for advocacy for her son. Mm-hmm. So I think that when we are looking at kids who are candidates who are deaf and hard of hearing kids that are candidates for AAC, who are kids who, or deaf plus or deaf with disabilities, I think it's really important to see the person holistically, to look at them from head to toe, and what really matches them. Hearing loss is a spectrum, as we know with other things, and it's not just a one size fits all. So do they need more of a visual approach? Do they need more of what types of reinforcements, or do they need more hands-on? Do they need more modeling? Do they need more this? Do they need and I think being open to that with whatever their diagnosis is. I know I had one kiddo who had Usher syndrome, and I worked very, very closely with a TVI, a teacher of the visually impaired. And I never moved a toe out of line without consulting her with AAC, because access was so important visually for her, because she used a visual language. So I can't now do what I'm doing unless I know what visually she can see and what visually she's accessing. And then also considering the occupational therapist, because is it direct access? Are we now eye gaze is out of the question for her? What can we use? A stylist? Can we use this? Or in sort of positioning? And then it was such a cool experience. So I think that when we are looking at different with communicators, with additional things and happening, and we're working with, I think, looking back at what that parent said, is that where, I hate saying it like a percentage, but which one takes, which one are we looking at more in terms of or don't look at it like that, look at it the child as a whole, and just kind of be not labeling something, and just kind of looking at as it's a support. We don't need to put it in a box, in a closet, in a drawer. It doesn't need to be labeled, and just kind of putting it with the child versus anything else.
Yeah. And I think that there comes some really strong questions that you can ask a family to kind of understand, similar to your family sharing. Like, I look at autism as the primary diagnosis. There's so many beautiful reflective questions that we can ask family members to start thinking about that and thinking about what really matters and what they feel is one of the most important things or some of the most important things, and allows us to kind of help prioritize, because it can get quite messy when we're thinking about all the different types of approaches we could take. And I think getting really clear on what the family is valuing and what they, what path feels like the right path for them, we can kind of help support that journey by asking the right questions. And I think that that's something that is definitely part of my clinical work. But I think particularly in a situation like this, it's like we want to really understand what the family finds important, and how they view their child, and like what outcomes they'd like to see, and really like showing all the different kind of paths that we could use to potentially get there. I'm thinking about a specific case that I had. This child was autistic and just had gotten cochlear implants. He was probably 4. And it was a very tricky case because he was also, right after the cochlear implants, was very much going down a path of auditory verbal therapy. And I'm just curious, I won't share what happened in this situation. I'll circle back to it. But I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on these approaches, because in a nutshell, the auditory verbal therapist was very against AAC and any type of visual support that I was giving during my sessions. And so it just made it really tricky to collaborate. And again, especially with that diagnosis of autism, like, okay, but we know that like autism, like visual supports are so helpful. And like, there was definitely like receptive language challenges going on. And it was a very tricky case, to say the least, for me to navigate. Super curious about your thoughts there, and like ways that we can figure out how to work alongside of some of these approaches that, maybe feel like they're in direct kind of opposition, if you will, with the approaches that we're taking with AAC.
No, definitely. And I think you described about half of the different inquiries that I get when I'm brought in doing evaluations in that sort of case, where like they might reach out to me because of my background knowledge, and I come in and I'm like, ooh. So and I feel and I see the stickiness, and I'm like, okay. And I think that's where us professionally have the more of the understanding. And I think it's where like, yes, ABT, auditory verbal therapy, listening spoken language, LISL, I think those are really great techniques and supports that are typically guided by speech language pathologists, teachers of the deaf, early interventionists. But I think we are, part of our professional label is speech, but then there also is language. And like a lot of the times the professionals who are, might be doing that are not always like language pathologists. Mm-hmm. And understanding that like language is not just one thing. And one of my favorite examples is like, when I work with kids and like I knock on my desk, I am using, yes, I hear that, but my language is telling me it's light, it's hard. Where could it be? Is it leaning on something? That's my language telling me, not that my ears are identifying something. So like, that's kind of the example I like to use. And it is really tricky because again, like we're looking at the family, like when autism is involved and then a diagnosis is involved, like typical black and white ABT is not going to always work because there is something else being involved. It becomes a modge podge. We kind of flip this, we flip the desk, we flip the, what we know. And I think sometimes like those professionals are like, this is what I know and that's it. And like, they might not have training, like I'll be a devil's advocate, and they might not have the training and have the background to work with kids who are not just kids who are working on ABT and nothing else. And so it becomes really tricky. And so I kind of like to pull rank sometimes and just be like, this is like, this is my background. I have the knowledge of language and like what this is. And, kids who present with this diagnosis, can sometimes, benefit from these sort of things. And like, yes, this works, but we need to, if this isn't working, we need to bring other things in. So we're not missing time in like a really important age that they're missing all this time because we're trying to work on an approach that's not, sufficing the speech and language needs of this child. So that's kind of sometimes where I go into is like the longer that we delay these sort of visual supports, I think it just keeps adding on to it, and the gap gets bigger and bigger. So that's kind of the approach I like to take with it. And I think it gets hard because parents, at the end of the day, they, very oftentimes, like, and rightfully so, they do want their child to communicate, and sometimes they don't have a full picture as to what that looks like. So I think having different options and, like, kind of reiterating what we always love to say with people who, are AAC enthusiasts, like, it's not going to hinder spoken language development. It's not going to hinder language development in general. It supports it. And I think trying to find different examples, and sometimes also like connection over compliance, and trying to find those different ways to get the families in their buy-in as to why this would work. And also be like, give me a chance. You gave them a chance. Now give me my chance. Like, you got your free trial with them. Now give me my free, my 2-week free trial. So I think sometimes, like, that's kind of like my selling point with families. And it can be really tricky because, again, it is like, it's the family's choice. And maybe they've had that relationship with the ABT person for longer than us. So, like, are they, maybe they work in the home, or maybe like it is somebody who has more of a connection with the family, or like in that type of thing. So it gets where, like, you're now trying to, like, enter in on a relationship and kind of like flip everything. So it's definitely not easy.
No, totally. And like, I think that with my client that I referenced, it was just so obvious that while they were doing really great work in really like honing his ear and his hearing and like really training that, he just became like just very echolalic. And just like this was not helping support his language development. It was like helping his speech, right? Like, it was helping him learn how to listen and watch someone's mouth and like imitate, but it was not doing anything for his language. And he just was like so frustrated. Like, he could not communicate what was going on. And it was just like, there had to be kind of a place for both. And I was totally willing to like figure out ways to kind of mold in. And I was like, teach me what you do with him. I'll like do like 5 to 10 minutes of my session with him. Like, I don't know, like, I'm not trained in this, but I'm willing to learn. And just, I think you said it perfectly. It's just like, people know what they know, and anything outside of that can feel like, well, I'm not really sure, but like, I do know what I do know. And like, I'm going to do that. And it's like, that type of thinking is just so myopic in a lot of ways, and not really doing justice to the kids that are in front of us, because just because like you usually do things a certain way with this type of kid, it's like when we have new information, and more importantly, information that's showcasing this approach in and of itself is not working entirely, like, we need to kind of go back to the drawing board. We need to collaborate with other professionals. And it's just like, is a really tricky situation. And I think it's like, it's kind of similar to how, our AAC users sometimes are working with an SLP that focuses primarily on speech, right? Especially if they have motor speech things going on. But even so, like, articulation challenges, it's like, well, how do we do both things? Because when I am trying to support language, I'm really like, teaching language and giving space and really like allowing a child to really like come to some type of communication opportunity that is organic and intrinsically motivated. Conversely, if I'm working on speech and motor speech as an example, it's like, look at my mouth, say what I say, like, say exactly how I do it, activate mirror neurons. And so it really is in direct opposition. And so it's like, it's a balancing act. Like, I totally understand when families want to kind of go down a path of enhancing or improving verbal speech. Especially if it's like, a child has apraxia of speech and there's no other diagnoses going on. It's like, yeah, like, really good speech therapy is important. But even that is tricky to kind of balance, like, okay, how do we pause and not have kids just staring at our mouth and waiting for us to tell them what to say, and like really practice those language opportunities, right? So it's such a balancing act. And I think it's even trickier when we're talking about deaf and hard of hearing populations, just because like, it's just this extra layer of messiness that it's hard to kind of like weed through.
Yeah. And the messiness, I think, just comes from sometimes just professionals not always being aware, having the exposure. Like sometimes when people reach out to me, like, this is my first case and I've been in this field for 20 years. And I'm like, okay. So like sometimes there's so much happening at one time for everybody that it's like trying to make those decisions can be really hard.
Totally, totally. Okay. We talked a little bit about like some of the strategies to think about, and I definitely want to like double click on that because I feel like that's a really kind of actionable step that someone can take away from this podcast episode. You talked about potentially Bluetooth connections to a child's hearing aids. What are some other things that, like, if you're not in this space and you have a student on your caseload and you're like, I really don't know how to support them, what are some other kind of like hidden gems that someone can take away?
Definitely. There's a free resource that I have made with Language First that does feature matching and talks about all different types of, I think, like, feature matching things to look at for deaf and hard of hearing kids. So you guys can check it out if you want. But some of those things that we do mention are also just like symbols in terms of like AAC icons. Like Symbol Sticks has a fantastic repertoire of sign language symbols. So if you want to be able to have like the sign replace the visual, or if you will, like how on Touch Chat, like there's more in the corner, like that's Symbol Sticks. And so they do have a very I think they have a plentiful library, but like we want to be careful. Like there was one time I remember I was like going through trying to find a different sign for something, and I was looking at this sign that was using your middle finger, and it was like starting at the belly button area and then it was going up, and I was like, what is this? And I showed a couple of different colleagues and like, it's feel. So feel is using your middle finger, it's on your chest. So it's taking a 3D language and making it 2D sometimes can like things get a little bit fuzzy. Yeah. But a really great thing that some apps do have is the ability to make GIFs out of icons, which is really cool. And also uploading your own videos, which is really important for when you're doing sign names. Mm-hmm. So like you can have a video that will just, you like can upload it to YouTube and you can then have it save. And like when you click on the button, it can be pop up and it's like someone's sign name. It could be that person signing it if you want to do it that way. Or it could be a phrase if you're working with GLP kids who are using ASL and AAC and kind of having like signed phrases. And it's really helpful, like things like that, because it can be something that, again, you're, connecting the identity. Also, like something that I really like to do is on the homepage of any kid's AAC device that uses AAC and ASL is I need an interpreter button, like a help button. So sometimes like some of my kids who are out in the community who are, at jobs, or maybe like they unfortunately don't always have a consistent interpreter with them on their job sites, or when they're doing like volunteer work, or they're doing like more like job coaching things. It's unfortunate, and it's a true factor in the world with that type of staffing. And so like I need an interpreter. Like if something happens, they get hurt, the person, like maybe they're, the manager doesn't know what to do, and it's like I need an interpreter, or like, and that kind of a thing. So I think that's important in terms of advocacy that for that child, just because it's on the homepage. Like if something, they're not able to kind of like process, I need to go into my social, I need to go into help, and you're like going into folder, it's on the homepage and that's it. It's like an automatic button. So I kind of like that for some of my kiddos. There's a bunch of different things in terms of like just different, like if you're looking at like a motor planning versus folder for some of our kids who, yes, they're using a visual language, but the visual attention piece is so important, because kids who are deaf and hard of hearing that are growing up in a hearing culture, hearing world, they, we don't even realize it. Like you and I are staring at each other, but I'm then looking at the corner, I'm looking up, I'm looking around. Our language doesn't require us to hold visual attention. So for kids, that model is not always there. We're in a visual language, they need to hold visual attention in order to communicate with their communication partner. So those types of communication patterns that is it sometimes can be like developing. So having the understanding of like, are we looking at something that has like less hits to an icon or motor, like the motor planning folder lamp, what are we looking at in order, like how is their visual attention, how is it developed, and things like that. So I think that is something I like to factor in for my kiddos, because they don't always realize like I need to continuously, like it's, it's a little bit different when they're using the AAC device. device. So a couple of those things I like to kind of keep in the back of my mind.
You just blew my mind, Quinn, with like this idea of like sustained visual attention. Like what an important piece of information to think about, because you're exactly right. Like in order to sign back and forth, or at least even capture a message, like someone needs to be able to sustain visual attention. And like so often, so many of our kids, granted, many of our young kids haven't acquired that skill or practiced that skill enough yet. But even some of our autistic individuals, like that's a skill that's just very challenging, even across kind of the lifespan. So, wow, like so simple, yet like so relevant. And, oftentimes there's conversations around, should we do sign? Like right as like we're deciding, like, should we do sign or should we do AAC? And like, I love kind of talking about the pros and cons, right? It's like, well, one of the like downsides of sign language is that it's not universally understood. It's like another language that someone has to speak, basically. So the question becomes like, how can we incorporate that, but also like try to support individuals with being as understood by as many people as possible? I feel like that visual attention piece is another kind of consideration. Again, I think the younger the child, the more kind of leniency or grace we can give them, because we don't, we know that type of a skill develops more over time. But such an important piece to the puzzle is like, if you don't have that visual attention, then like you are kind of setting kids up for not really being successful, when we know that's such an important piece of this puzzle.
Definitely. And I think also being aware of the type of learner that your kid is. I had one kid who was the most insane peripheral learner I have ever encountered. She would be looking over here, but then she was able to kind of see like 180 degrees over here. And I was like, I wish I had that type of like ability. And so like the teacher oftentimes would be like, she's not looking, she's not paying attention, but like she's modeling using her device, but fully paying attention to what's going on with the lesson. And like she was deaf, who was using AAC and ASL. So like, again, like sometimes like even as, professionals who, adult deaf professionals who were, working with some of these kids, like they're like, again, our language, our cultural understanding is that you need to be looking at me. But for her, that's not something that, she didn't require that, but she still was gaining all the information. And so it's like such an interesting kind of thing to be a part of and to witness how each kid has their own form of visual attention, that we don't always need to like, similarly with kids on the spectrum with eye contact, like we have to work on eye contact to make it up. I hear that one more time. I'm like, and I think it's similarly where like I also like kind of backtracking a little bit, like when we were talking about just even like access in general, like I like to bring in my PTs. I love physical therapists, because when we're thinking of like the zone of signing, typically signing, I'm going to be signing in a certain area within, a box in a certain area that's accessible to my learners. Some of my kids, if there's, weakness in the shoulders, weakness in the forearms, there's heaviness, if there's, one limb, what are we looking at? And so working on how we can find this zone and like strengthening certain muscles, or what's the again, I'm not a physical therapist, so I feel like dexterity is not the right word, but like in terms of where we need to be in the zone of signing, I had one kid who would literally sign like down by his hip. And I'm like, buddy, you're gonna bring it up here. So again, and like, so working with the PT on that in terms of like, okay, like, so if we're looking at where we're signing are certain types of hand shapes or locations on the body. So like, sign language is made up of different hand shapes that, create different signs, and the locations as well. There's 5 parameters of sign, and location and hand shape are 2 of them. And so, something where like we're using, so take holding out your hand and bringing your thumb across the midline of your dominant hand. And then now I'm going to put it on the top of my head, around the middle of my forehead. And I'm going to do boy. So bring my thumb and against my other 4 fingers, and I'm going to bring them up and down this boy. So for my one kid, he had a really hard time. I was working with the OT and the PT, because he could not bring his thumb across midline, and also bringing his shoulder up and rotating his shoulder up and keeping it there. So we had to do adaptive signs, and that became such a, like, this could take years. And now he's missing out on, development of language. Again, the 3 of us worked together for years, but like, that's when I brought in AAC because like it is accessible at all times for him when he has it, because there were certain signs that we're adapting unless other people know what they are and where are we bringing them to. And if then he has an interpreter and like that person now has to like learn his signs and like what he's using within the school. And it was like a whole big thing. And we were kind of like the three of us working together being like, what do we do and how do we support this kiddo? And we were kind of like, let's look at AAC and kind of like bring that into the picture, which was really great and super successful, which was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many different considerations. I feel like kind of the takeaway here is you have to really look at the individual in front of you and really kind of go to the drawing board with all of the professionals on the team sometimes to really get a clear picture as to like what is the best modality and the strongest modality. And, you know, I'm such a big believer in like kids will show us, kids will reveal that. And so like being really curious and really seeing like, okay, if we've introduced some science, if we introduce some AAC, like what are kids gravitating towards too, is like a huge piece to the puzzle. So I think that it's just like such a important thing to think about, like, how do we collaborate? How do we get curious? How do we like step back and observe like what's happening and then pivot when we need to, which it sounds like with this kid, it was kind of like, okay, like signing, yikes. Like we're not seeing the motor movements that we need in order to really be successful. We're only doing, you know, signs that not everyone understands. So like, how do we, you know, introduce a modality of language that's just more accessible, basically?
It's definitely, there's so many different things. And especially recently, almost a year ago, last September, ASHA changed the standings on that. It was a little bit two different contradicting statements that like existed in flotation. ASHA having position statements on that American Sign Language is a language while also calling it a form of AAC. Mm-hmm. And last September, they revised it. And so they now identify American Sign Language as a language and no longer as a form of no tech AAC, which I think really helped clarify a lot of things for professionals in terms of writing reports, in terms of asking for services. When you're looking at like an interpreter, you know, they'd be like, are we filing this under assistive technology? And I'm like, no. Like, you mean like, are we looking at a teacher of the deaf? We're looking at a deaf mentor for some of our littles, looking at, you know, an ASL teacher, someone who is deaf and who has, you know, that their native language is sign language, and making sure that child is being taught by a native signer and not by somebody who, you know, I know 100 signs and that kind of a thing. So I think that really helped clarify a lot of things as well for professionals in just the ASL world, but as well as the AAC and ASL world, just kind of like where things lie. So I think that was really helpful too.
Totally. Before we wrap up, Quinn, tell me a little bit about some research that you were a part of that just came out.
Yeah, I have been working with an amazing woman who is based in Australia, Queensland, Australia, who we just published a paper that just came out 2 weeks ago. Absolutely, you know, thrilled that this is out there. One of a kind kind of paper, just talking about how AAC and ASL can kind of work together to support communication. It was published by the Annals of the Deaf, which is a publication of Gallaudet University. So it's just so great that that's out there, and I highly recommend everyone to kind of take a peek. It's just something that I'm so proud of, and I feel like I'm done. I've published. I've done what I wanted to do. So this topic has really been the forefront of my professional career and just what I've been doing and, you know, who I've been working with, and just seeing something that I've been so passionate about and trying to help create, you know, guidelines and tools and things like that, to like see it come to life on paper and just like being backed with research, I think is such a wonderful thing to go, yes. And like that, you know, like what you're saying is true, which is really wonderful. And it has had such positive feedback in like the research community so far. And that it also spans the idea of it's two different visual languages as well, that this is circulating in Australia and it's circulating here. So I think that's such a cool thing as well. Like, you know, I was like, do you want to trade places? Like, I'll go to Australia anytime. So, I mean, like, I'll take Australia over Jersey anytime. So
yeah,
it's been a really fun experience, and it's such a long time coming, you know, just seeing all this happen. So I really love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. And I feel like it kind of underscores the importance of more research in this area, because you know, we know that so many students can benefit from AAC. And I feel like the more kind of guidance we have as professionals on that intersection, I think just the easier this becomes. And like anything else, it's just like we need a little bit more information guiding our clinical work. And so I'm really excited that you were a part of that. Would love if you could share the link and we'll put it in our show notes. For those of you who are like, oh my gosh, Quinn, I love her. Like, how do I access all of the things, ASL, AAC, deaf of hard of hearing populations? Where can people find you?
So they can find it on Language First's website. It's languagefirst.org. Everything that I mentioned today is free. It's all, made free there. I do have the wonderful ability to, I do help make some things that go out monthly. So we're doing something for AAC Awareness Month. We have a couple new like parent handouts that are going to be coming out in the next month for September. So I love working on those that kind of pop out and go into circulation. So it's just been a really fun journey. And again, they're all fully accessible. So like that's the great thing is that everyone can kind of see them and it's not like they're keyed up somewhere. So which I love.
Yeah, definitely would recommend following Quinn on social media. I feel like you share some really great information there, and we will definitely link to all of those things on the show notes. Quinn, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all of your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me.
For Talking with Tech, I'm Rachel Madel, joined today by Quinn Kelly. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.